While Romero's cut of Dawn of the Dead is often seen as one of the most successful zombie films of all time, the Dario Argento cut shared an equal success in non-English speaking European territories, particularly in his home nation of Italy, where the film effectively kick-started its own subgenre. Italy has an interesting history with zombie films, and one of the very first true Italian zombie films to be released would create quite a bit of confusion for a worldwide audience. 1979's Zombie 2, also known as Zombies, also known as Zombie Flesh Eaters, also known as Zombies 2, came into existence thanks to Italy's interesting loopholes on copyright infringement. You see, Italy has, or at least had, a loophole in their copyright laws, which allowed any Italian filmmaker to release a film as a sequel to an original work, at least from an advertising perspective. So, for example, if a young Italian filmmaker decided that 1989's Batman was brilliant and he wanted to make an official sequel to it in Italy, as long as he wasn't directly connected to the copyrighted material in the first film, they could just go right ahead and make Batman 2. In the case of Zombie 2, it was originally scripted under the title Nightmare Island, and was to be a gory reimagining of the more classic horror film genres such as The Island of Dr. Moreau. However, once the script was finished in 1978, its author, Dardano Sacchetti, went to try and get the film off the ground, only to find the financiers would only be interested if he retooled the film to be a zombie movie, due to the critical success of Argento's cut of Dawn of the Dead, known as Zombie in European territories. He conceded to these requests, and after tweaking the film's plot, they were able to secure their second choice for director, Lucio Fulci. Fulci finally took the film into production in 1978, and it was only after production had more or less wrapped that the financiers decided to completely can the idea of making it its own standalone film, and instead decided to retitle it Zombie 2, to market it as a direct sequel to Dawn of the Dead. There was even a small legal challenge by the rights owners of Dawn of the Dead to try and get this stopped, but Italian lawmakers at the time decided to uphold current laws, meaning as a result there are two completely different film franchises based off of Romero's original work. Now, I should start off by saying that this film has almost no connection to the events of Dawn of the Dead. Obviously it has zombies in it, and there are a couple of lines of dialogue throughout that imply that this may be a prequel to Dawn that shows how the zombie outbreak began, but those scenes were tacked on after the bulk of the main film was produced in order to tie it more closely to the Romero work, and it doesn't really add anything to the production or to Dawn of the Dead as a whole. So for anyone coming to this film expecting a series of long-lost Romero-esque films, I'm sorry to say you might be disappointed. The film opens with an adrift ship blowing into a New York harbour. When police climb aboard the vessel to investigate, they find that the ship is in terrible condition, and after some initial searches they find a lone zombie on board, who attacks one of the cops while another one manages to shoot the zombie overboard. While the boat is under police investigation, the owner's daughter, Anne, turns up and begins to look for clues as to the whereabouts of her father. She sneaks on board to search for clues and bumps into Peter, a journalist who smells a story and was on board looking for leads. He finds a note from Anne's father saying he's trapped on a remote island where he's fearing for his life and that he may be dead by the time the note reaches Anne. Startled by this revelation, the two decide to travel to the island of Matul, with a couple who offer to take them there with the hopes of reuniting the father and daughter. However, on the way the boat suffers from some very serious damage and they end up stranded on Matul, which at that exact moment is having a terrific problem with the dead rising. They then encounter Dr. Menard, who is on the island desperately trying to find the source of the sudden zombification problem, with the locals swearing that it's voodoo, but Menard saying otherwise. This film is quite a mixed bag in all honesty. It's not a bad film by any sense of the word, and in particular it has to be said that the direction and cinematography are quite wonderful here, with some really nice experimental shots and some brilliant set pieces that really help give this film its own style and definition. Nothing quite looked like this film did for its time. I mentioned set pieces, and this film has some absolutely brilliant must-see moments. My personal absolute highlight being an underwater fight between a zombie and a shark, followed immediately by a round 2 involving a shark attacking a boat that definitely has a Jaws influence behind it. Those underwater scenes, particularly on Blu-ray, are absolutely gorgeous and really stand out in my mind. Equally, the scenes towards the end of the film in the hospital are wonderfully over the top and really give a sense of grandness, especially considering this film's £410,000 budget. The visual effects are absolutely fantastic for this film, and considering that I'm comparing these to Savini's effects, that's saying something. These zombies are nastier looking, grittier, dirtier, and just generally more unpleasant than the Romero zombies. With Romero zombies, they looked a bit like they'd only just died. Fulci zombies look like they've been buried for decades, and you wouldn't want one to even touch you, let alone attack you. The only thing the Fulci zombies have in common with Romero zombies is the blood effects, which are highly similar, but their disgusting, decomposing style really helps sell these zombies as realistic and deeply unpleasant. Romero zombies have an element of humanity still intact. You could visualise a Romero zombie as they were when they were alive. You get none of that with a Fulci zombie. They take on a much more classic style, but with a modernist revamp. As a result, your mileage may vary on whether you like these zombies or not, but they don't have much personality. Good points aside, this film does have some problems. The script itself is fairly weak, with poorly translated and delivered dialogue that really doesn't help an already fairly weak cast, and a less than brilliant dub that barely matches the actor's mouth movement. Add to this tons of padding that absolutely bloats the film beyond belief. One scene in particular that sprung to my mind was the car crash scene, which was honestly the most unnecessary on-screen car crash scene in a film that I have ever seen. Absolutely pointless subplots and extended back and forth talking points that don't advance the narrative really affect the pacing of this film, and not in a good way. When it's good, it's light and punchy, but a good chunk of this film is just way too slow. I mentioned earlier the acting, which I must also say is fairly poor in this production. It's not unwatchably bad, but it's inappropriately melodramatic and won't be winning any awards anytime soon. This sometimes works in a film's favour, but for the most part it doesn't, and it really doesn't help that the script seems to compress the important character development areas into short bursts rather than allowing it to develop over the course of the film. The relationship between Peter and Anne has some absolutely unrealistic development time, in which they're effectively in a romantic relationship after less than a day of knowing each other. The zombies are arguably the best performance in the film, but that won't be much of a compliment to people who actually had lines in this. Finally, and I really feel I should mention this for clarity, the soundtrack's a bit naff in my opinion. It's a little too much on the stock side, a bit too repetitive in places. A lot of people seem to really like this film's score, and it has had several vinyl issuings, but I personally couldn't see what all the fuss was about. It's a bit too generic, and while there were 1 or 2 tracks that I thought were quite cool, I shan't be rushing out to buy this one. This is not a bad film, with good direction and cinematography really helping give this film a unique feeling and style, and enough decent scenes and setups to make it very memorable. While the script and the soundtrack are somewhat lacking to me, and the acting and the dub could have been better, a decent amount of effort has gone into the practical effects, and surprisingly I found that this film is considerably more gorier than Dawn of the Dead. Its cult status as one of the original video nasties only helps to further cement its status as a film that needs to be seen. While I won't say that it's a classic, I'd say it's more than watchable.